On this edition of Independent Sources,
Arizona, this border state, has been in the forefront of what has been called some of the most anti-immigrant legislation in U.S. history. We look at why.
And we look at how a local organization is empowering citizen journalists. Welcome to Independent Sources. I'm Gary Pierre-Pierre.
And I'm Diana Ravinka. In the last year, Arizona has become a flashpoint in the immigration debate. The passage of the SB 1070 bill sent shockwaves throughout the country. Many protested the legislation that gave the police the power to detain anyone they suspected of being an undocumented immigrant.
Then recently, some Arizona lawmakers stir up another controversy with the issue of birthright citizenship. Their proposal would deny citizenship to children who are born in the U.S. to parents who are undocumented. Although some legislators say the bill is a long shot because it directly challenges the 14th Amendment, which grants citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil, it has inflamed many immigration advocates.
So why does it seem that this border state is leading the anti-immigration charge in the country? I sat down with reporters Daniel González and Felicia Persaud to talk about what's prompting this agenda. Daniel, how surprised were you to hear about yet another anti-immigration bill, the one against birthright citizenship, being pushed by Arizona?
Well, I wasn't surprised because we knew that was coming. There'd been talk about that for several months. And I wasn't surprised either because this has been happening for several years in Arizona, where we've seen an increasingly long string of bills aimed at clamping down on illegal immigration. So this has been in the works for a while, and we've seen many similar laws with the goal of clamping down on illegal immigration here in Arizona.
Give us a sense of the dynamic between the Hispanic community living in Arizona and the non-immigrant communities before this wave of anti-immigration bills and now.
Well, as you know, Arizona is a border state, and it has a very large Hispanic population. And it was also a state that at one time was part of Mexico, and there are some cities in Arizona that were actually part of Mexico before Arizona became part of the United States. So there are Mexican-American families that trace their roots back many, many generations. Some of the most longest people with the longest roots in Arizona are Latinos, Mexican-Americans. And I would say for the most part, Latinos have coexisted with the rest of the population quite well in Arizona. But more recently, because of the immigration laws, there's a lot more tension. There is certainly a feeling among many Latinos that the immigrants, at least, especially illegal immigrants, are under attack in the state. I should point out, though, that frequently I shouldn't say frequently, but I do receive calls and emails from Latinos with long roots in Arizona who are opposed to illegal immigration as well. So it's not a clear divide. There are folks who are Mexican American who are also concerned about illegal immigration.
Felicia, the birthright citizenship was ratified to grant citizenship to freed slaves and their children. And African American immigrant groups now say that this push for the anti-birthright citizenship bill is turning back the clock on the gains made by civil rights movement. Is that right, you believe?
I absolutely believe that. I think it is a civil rights issue of 2011. And really, people have to understand that folks have been coming here. If you look at the history of immigration, there has always been a wave of immigrants who come here illegally. And it's just a matter of the immigrant contribution to this country. I think people have to understand that and look at rational solutions. Everyone is very aware that there is a porous borders and there are issues related to that. States are feeling the pressure. The federal government, I think, needs to step up and really form a rational solution. And these irrational bills that are creating racist tensions across this country is not the solution.
Daniel, how much are these bills due to intolerance and racism?
Well, I definitely think there's an element of that. I also think, though, that a large part of what's happening in Arizona is due to the frustration over illegal immigration and some of the problems associated with illegal immigration. I'm not talking about the immigrants themselves, but going back into the 1990s, as you probably would know, the main gateways for illegal immigration were California and Texas. The federal government began fortifying those main corridors, El Paso and San Diego, and that pushed a lot of the traffic through Arizona. And at the same time, the economy boomed in the United States, which drew hundreds of thousands of workers by the year into the United States, and also Mexico's economy started to have some serious problems in the mid-1990s. So beginning in the late 1990s and especially around the year 2000, Arizona has become a major corridor for illegal immigration. And Phoenix itself has become a major transportation hub for illegal immigrants who come from the border. They're held in Phoenix before they're transported into the United States. And there's as these smuggling gangs have become more, or as illegal immigration has become more lucrative, it's drawn more of a criminal element into the smuggling trade. And so we've seen a lot of, especially in the mid-2000s, there was some very, very severe violence associated with the smuggling trade, and not just violence being perpetuated against smuggling gang, but against the immigrants themselves, immigrants being extorted, kidnapped, raped, held for ransom, all those kinds of crimes associated with illegal immigrant smuggling. So as this has gone on year after year after year over the last decade, there's been a mounting frustration. Also, Arizona is a state that grew tremendously over the 2000s. In the last decade, and many of the workers who stayed in Arizona were helping drive our economy. They were working in restaurants. We have a big resort industry. It was very common to go into resorts and find immigrants working there. Our construction industry, I visited many times construction sites, and the vast majority of the people working there were immigrants from Mexico or Latin America. So I think early on there was acknowledgement that a lot of immigrants were doing this work. But as this kind of continued and there was no solution at the federal level, the frustration at the state and local level came out. So I think that's why that was kind of a tipping point where you see all of the laws now that are being introduced have to do more with enforcement rather than kind of a more humanitarian approach towards immigration.
And Felicia, Daniel talked about frustration for the lack of comprehensive reform at the federal level. Should that pass soon, even though there are no signs of comprehensive reform being adopted in the near future, do you think states will not be as hot on these anti-immigration issues?
Well, I think states across the country now are picking up on the Arizona law. And you look at Florida, they're introducing bills. You look at Utah, right across the country, they're picking up the steam because they are frustrated. I understand the frustration. Nobody is in support of people breaking the law. I don't think anyone in this country wants to support that. But the fact is we have a problem. We have 11 million people in this country. We have no idea who they are, but they are a boon to the economy. They are supporting the economy of this country. And we need to address that issue. I think the Republicans have to come up with rational solutions, and stamping out with this birthright bill and all the other bills that they have just put into the House is not the solution. The solution is either you're going to give these folks a work permit or a travel document so that they can live legally, not give them a green card. It is not an amnesty. But also, if you're not going to do that, then you need to find the federal funds to round up 11 million people and deport them. It is either or, and they need to realize that and not try to step in between, because that is exactly what they're doing. They're not dealing with the problem at all. And
in closing, I'd like to ask this question, both of you. Felicia, what do you think are the long-term repercussions of the wave of anti-immigrant legislation coming out of Arizona and the copycat bills throughout the United States?
Well, it is rising the tension, the level of racism in this country. You look at what happened here in New York, it wasn't directly related to the immigrant bill, but when you talk about the rhetoric that came out of the Muslim mosque going at ground zero, and then you saw a cab driver being stabbed, an immigrant cab driver being stabbed because of that sort of rhetoric, that is the kind of incidents that you don't want to happen. You look at Staten Island and the incidents that are happening there against immigrants. This is the sort of issues that are going to continue to happen if you really don't address it. If you continue to create the divide and people don't understand, you leave them uneducated and you try to scapegoat immigrants, this is the sort of tension that is going to continue to rise, and it's going to reach a breaking point at some point and boil over.
Daniel?
Well, I wanted to point out that it is true that the major barrier right now to comprehensive immigration reform is on the Republican side of the aisle, but it was actually the Republicans who were the ones who were the first to propose comprehensive immigration reform back in 2006 and 2007. That was a Republican-led initiative. Congressman Flake here in Arizona and Senator McCain were among the leaders of comprehensive immigration reform. But now, I mean, the Republican Party is divided over this issue, and it's the enforcement side of the Republican Party that has the upper hand right now. And it's really unclear to see what, from a journalistic standpoint, where this is going to go. It does seem that we're going to continue to see more enforcement leaning policies and laws, at least into the near future. And it's unclear when Congress is going to get around to the comprehensive immigration reform. But at some point, they're going to have to deal with it, because this is a problem that's not going to go away, and especially as the economy begins to improve, we're going to see the level of illegal immigration, which has been down over the last several years, begin to increase. So it's something that Congress has refused to address, and the longer they address it, the more difficult it becomes to solve it. I think it's going to have to be dealt with at some point.
Daniel González and Felicia Persaud, thank you very much for being here today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back on Independent Sources, a call for intrepid citizen journalists.
Before that, Marlene Peralta has some other news.
Thanks, Vianora. Here's a look at some headlines from the ethnic media. The Korea Daily News reports that domestic violence is still a persistent problem in New York City's Korean community. According to a report from the Family Service Center, 57% of all calls Koreans made to a local 24-hour hotline last year were related to domestic violence. In fact, the findings reveal that 84% of all Korean domestic violence victims were wives abused by their husbands. This week's Amsterdam News editorial takes on Black entertainment television, BET, as the network marks its 31st anniversary on the air. The Harlem paper praised the channel for airing new quality programming, such as the show The Game. The paper says the show depicts African-American football players in a realistic way. Although the editorial lists other shows as high quality, it also criticizes some of BET's program choices that are considered humiliating, especially among women. Bolivia made headlines recently after a local businessman presented his new invention, a coca-based soda. According to El Diario La Prensa, the soft drink called Coca Brinco has been endorsed by Bolivia's President Evo Morales. Aside from the soda, there is also an energy drink, a toothpaste, candy, and other products made of coca leaves being distributed in the South American country. The Forward reports that the first Black female rabbi will be leaving her Greenville, North Carolina congregation. Alisa Stanton, who made headlines when she became the country's first Black female rabbi, said the congregation did not renew her contract after being with them for less than 2 years. The board president of the Reform and Conservative Movement, Samantha Pilot, said the decision not to renew Stanton's contract was made because many felt she wasn't a good fit for the direction the congregation is going. And finally, from the Italian Tribune, the Vatican is working with the Discovery Channel on a new series about exorcism, which aims to recreate real-life stories on demonic possessions based on cases investigated by the Catholic Church. The Vatican will give access to its archives as well as allowing its religious experts to appear on the show. Those are just a few headlines from the ethnic media. Back to Gary and Vianora in the studio.
Thanks, Marlene. The National Black Programming Consortium is looking for citizen journalists. The Harlem-based organization's main focus is to train and mentor producers working on media projects focused on contemporary Black experiences.
The consortium recently launched their mobile journalism collective project. The initiative trains citizen journalists to capture news in their communities with digital equipment such as the flipped video camera, and a process they call the one-shot reporting technique.
So far, the project has been launched in Harlem and South Texas. I sat down with Christian Ugbode, the consortium's media coordinator, to talk about the project. Thanks for being here, Christian. For the sake of full disclosure, we want our viewers to know that one of our producers, Michelle Garcia, is a part of the Mobile Journalism Collective. She recently traveled to her native South Texas to launch the arm of the program. Before we start, let's have a look at her report about some of the work started down there.
South of San Antonio, Texas, my birthplace, and further south, the Rio Grande Valley, on the shore of the river that marks the border between the United States and Mexico. It's a region that evokes powerful images of illegal immigration, border violence, and drug smuggling. But there's more to the story down there. I decided it was time to give locals back home a chance to make their voices heard nationally.
The valley is so different from anybody else's. We have the wall, we're exposed to what's going on in Mexico, and for that matter, we are also part of that. There's a lot of pressure.
I teamed up with the Harlem-based National Black Programming Consortium and pulled together a team of activists and journalists to create the Border Mobile Journalism Collective. We gave each team a flip camera to shoot local stories of national interest, told by the people who live and work in the Rio Grande Valley.
We're looking at the badge of Fire Chief Billy Schwartz, who in addition to being the fire chief for Santa Maria, Texas, is the pastor for the First Baptist Church.
It's taken a little different twist to it now.
Stories about small towns coming to the aid of residents in nearby Ciudad Mier, who abandoned their town after the warring Gulf Cartel and Zetas took over.
The people on the other side of the border are part of our community. You know, they're our neighbors.
The Rio Grande Valley, rich in history and culture, is also one of the poorest regions in the country, where military service and crossing borders is a way of life.
I myself am a veteran. I did a tour in Iraq and I did a tour in Kuwait. And now I work with AdaptaPlatoon to send care packages to the rest of the soldiers.
Border stories have a small town feel, but with a big world impact.
What's going on here? Well, this is our ESL class.
We're here, we're not lost. Come visit. We're still alive, although we have all the gang by the borders. We're alive and kicking, right?
In these towns, immigration enforcement is not just a headline, it's part of the landscape, posing challenges for citizen journalists like Mike Seifert, who must be mindful of the border security when he's out interviewing students brought to the U.S. as children illegally.
I'm tired of being afraid because they patrol all of that. They come on campus. So you thought about going back to Mexico?
I did.
Although you're not really from there since you were 8 years old.
Exactly. I don't know the streets. It's Matamoros just across the border, but I don't know them.
What will come over the next year, we hope, are stories of the embattled border, a place that people call home. For Independent Sources, I'm Michelle Garcia.
Christian, interesting program. Give us a sense of when it started and how and why it started.
Well, we started about a year ago, and the work started really as part of us trying to support independent producers, which is what we do. at the National Black Programming Consortium. We've been around for about 30 years, so each of our programs really goes toward aiding voices of producers of color, specifically African American and Latino mostly, to sort of have their own voice, particularly with new digital mediums like small format cameras that are now coming out. But for 30 years, that's what we've been doing, is providing content to the public broadcasting system. And
where are you operating right now, besides, from this report in South Texas, we did that. You in Harlem, and
yes.
What is the nature of the other programs?
Well, in Harlem, we're working with an outfit called All Things Harlem, run by a very strong activist named Jazz Hayden. And in Atlanta, we work with Spelman College, with students down there. So our goal is to basically start citizens all across the country recording their own news, in a sense, empowering them to sort of feel like their own voices are important to the conversation of newsmaking generally, particularly in places like Harlem.
And these broadcasts, mostly broadcast, and do you have a website
yes.
where they played?
Yeah. Our website is blackpublicmedia.org, and that's where a lot of content ends up. And also we have a YouTube channel, which has been really good for us in terms of maintaining that two-way conversation, which is what we feel like small format journalism is really about, is being able to create stories, publish them quickly, and get a feedback from the audience that you're trying to inform. So that's part of what our goal is. I mean,
speaking of format, you've been using a one-shot format, right? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the one-shot method is something that we came up with about a year and a half ago. We got a grant from the Ford Foundation to do some trainings in Malawi for journalists who were covering the election, and we figured come up with a quick, efficient way that was accurate, but also sort of digital and sort of new age in a sense. So we taught them using this small flip camera to do in-camera storytelling. So they wouldn't have to do much more than trim the beginnings and the ends of the stories. So it maintained the sort of journalistic integrity of the information, but at the end of the day, it was so quick to do that they could then upload that information to the Election Commission, particularly in places where elections are being disputed like Malawi. So it really turned out to be a quick way to tell a story, but also sort of get your hands dirty in sort of a new digital sort of way.
Do you do any radio or even print or writing in this program?
In the program specifically, it's really about video, because I think part of what we're learning is that video is becoming a mass medium, particularly in terms of crossing barriers of language. To think about the fact that YouTube didn't exist maybe 6 years ago, people don't even sort of fathom that. I think video has really become, particularly for young people, a way to share back and forth. So that's what we do.
In a year that you've been around, can you share with us some of the strongest pieces that you've done, most impactful ones?
Well, a lot of what we've been enjoying seeing is our voices in Harlem really taking shape, and a lot of that has to do with people who are fed up with police brutality, who are fed up with sort of community inaction, and particularly, and surprisingly actually, people who just want to document their community, even if it's just people who are doing good in the community. Because I think a lot of what happens in Harlem is you get the crews descending on you when you have the gunshots going off, but no one's doing the little story about the guy who teaches chess every Friday on, at the basketball court. So a lot of those kind of stories are mostly impactful, and those are the stories that end up being shared widely. But right now, just because we like wide perspectives, we're also collecting stories around people's perspectives on Haiti. So if you go to blackpublicmedia.org/Haiti right now, there's a place where you can upload your own testimonial, your own perspective on what's going on.
How do you measure success in a project like that?
Well, it's hard because at the end of the day, it's not these people's jobs. They could choose not to do it. But what's been uplifting is that at the end of the day, they have a new skill. So for us, that's how we measure success, sort of the number of people trained. And we've trained about 30 people in the last year. And what we're hoping to do is to sort of keep getting funding, to keep doing it in more communities, so that when you come to blackpublicmedia.org, it's not just our voices, it's the voices of sort of across the nation of independent voices.
Speaking of funding, who are your major funders besides the Ford Foundation?
We're primarily funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We're part of a national minority consortia of minority producers from the Center of Asian American Media, the Latino Public Broadcasters, Pacific Islanders in Communication, and also there's someone I always forget, but we're the National Black Programming Consortium, so together there's about 5 of us.
Now, you in Atlanta, you mentioned, of course, Harlem, South Texas. Right. Where is growth areas for you?
Well, this next year, what we're hoping to do is really hone in on the places that we are and get more stories from them. So we're going to be doing a lot of focus in Harlem and Texas, particularly because of the immigrant story, just in terms of where it's going nationally and sort of getting people to have small stories that mean a lot. Because it's like, at the end of the day, you get pundits on TV talking about immigration and all that stuff, and it doesn't really have the same impact as someone who takes their flip camera and says, you know, I'm your neighbor, so I'm going to tell the story about the guy who's on the other side of the wall. So those stories are part of what we're trying to focus on this year. Fascinating. Thank you, Christian, for being here. Thank you very much, Gary.
Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
You realize that 49 million Americans struggle with hunger? That's 1 out of every 6 Americans.
These people are around us every day. They're our friends, they're our coworkers, their kids go to school with our kids.
Sometimes we're not even aware that they're struggling. This problem is closer than you think. So is the solution.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
To be a great dad is the most important job in a man's life, but it doesn't have to be hard. All it takes is a few minutes of your time, because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
Before we leave, we'd like to invite you to join our conversation on Facebook. Let us know what you think about some of the issues we've covered on this episode.
So until next time, be independent-minded.